until you get to be a tenured professor, I'm assuming. But I think I would consider teaching both because I already like it, what I do. I like the schedule Monday through Friday, weekends off, Christmas, all that kind of stuff. So definitely public school has their benefits too.
I actually would say that the biggest draw for me to higher education would be the schedule. I teach every single day. I teach French 1, French 2, French 3 that's testing in a particular program, French 4 that's testing in a particular program, again, but at a different level, and then a third program for French 4. So it sounds real nice to only teach 12 hours a week. That sounds pretty fantastic. And imagine if you had TAs to grade it for you. Like, that sounds cool to me. But like I said before, the things that I love the most about being a teacher are not the things that are part of the job description. They're the relational aspects. And I'm actually a huge introvert, so I kind of want to vomit right now, honestly. But it's really amazing to get to make relationships with your colleagues and with your students. So I have students that I've taught for 4 years in a row. I have students that come back after they graduate college to come say hi to me, and genuinely want me to know what's going on in their life. I don't go ask them. They want me to know because they thought that I was an important part of their life. When I left, I snuck out of my last class a little bit early today to come here. And so I had another teacher take over for me. So as I'm leaving, like they're small children, these 15 and 16-year-olds say, "Bye, Mrs. VanDon, we love you." And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But there's something kind of wonderful about walking into a room and knowing that you have this whole group of people who mostly want to know what you think and want your advice and care about doing their best, because not only do they want to learn, but they want you to be proud of them. And so it's so much more relational than working in a higher education situation is. I mean, once you get to PhD or even master's, possibly you can develop relationships with students you're advising, but it's not the same and it's not on the same scale.
Something else worth adding too is that the PhD situation, you have to do a lot of researching as well and publication, and there's a lot of pressure on that. And it sounds great, and I'm sure it is great, but it's not just, I only have 3 classes, that I'm teaching. There's a lot more of the other load as well. And I would eventually like to get a PhD, which would be phenomenal, but a lot of experience is a good thing and usually helpful. I'm also terrified to get a PhD because I think all of my German teachers would just jump out the window because that's how some of my writing was. Dr. Pear's laughing too much to say that's false. But the teaching experience would be helpful. So 10 or 15 years worth of being in the field teacher would be tremendously beneficial if you want to do it later. I know 2 people who have PhDs that teach in LISD, and they say that they didn't want to have to do the publishing and the research, so they just stayed in the high school, and they seem happy. So you can always do it later.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really that difference between, teaching being the full job, whereas in higher ed, teaching is one part of your job, then you have research and you have administration and other things. So it's just maybe a question of preference and what you feel drawn to. Time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. All right, got someone here. All right, I'll come over to you.
So, sorry, I'm actually a history major here at Tech, but I'm also a German minor, and I was curious if it was possible to teach both at high school.
Okay, so last year, in addition to all the French classes I mentioned, I also taught AP World History because I too was a history major in my bachelor's and my master's before I quit. And yes, it's absolutely possible. It's, as a German teacher, the fear that you would have would be if they need you to teach all the German and you offer 4 different years of German, then it's kind of rough to have 4 different classes of German and a class of history at the same time. Depending on your district and depending on what their needs are for particular subject areas, it's entirely possible. They asked me to teach AP World History because, they asked me to teach another class in addition to French because my numbers were getting a little low because of Spanish. And so I said, well, I have a history degree. If you're just going to put me in a class, I have a history degree. And I can actually teach this dual credit if you'd like for me to do that. And so I spent last year teaching French and history. When you're hired by a public school, they're not typically thinking about plugging you into 2 different departments, but it's always a possibility that's open. And it's actually really easy once you've been certified in one area to add another area. So I'm certified to teach social studies between 9th and 12th grade and French K through 12. And so all I had to do to become certified in social studies was to get a transcript to prove that I had taken coursework in social studies and then take their content exam, which, by the way, a content exam for a composite 9 through 12 social studies is really easy, like super easy.
Okay, any more questions? Didn't want to miss anyone who wanted to maybe ask a question over here? Okay.
Hallo, guten Abend, mein Lehrer. Ich habe die Fragen, aber un momento porque yo quiero hablar con la instructora aquí y por moi no parle francés. Cuando tú estás un estudiante en la escuela, ¿cómo te especificas los verbos cuando tú hablas? Y weil sie gestudiert in der Sprache, für die deutsche Sprache, können Sie jetzt helfen, mit das Worten impliziert while zu sprechen? What are the best words to use while you're building a language?
All right, a trilingual question. Thank you.
I think the best words to use are according to the content or the topic that you're dealing with in that moment. There's a lot of language that is time-bound, and the way that we use it. So the more that we connect with that with the students, the better. In other words, Spanish is spoken in 22 countries, and we speak different Spanish in all the areas. Also, every Mexican is different. North Mexico different than Central Mexico, different than South Mexico. So we have all these regional dialects and ways that we pronounce things. So I think addressing that is important. In our curriculum, we consider that. Like a Spanish 4 and 5, we read all the literature from different places, not just one dominant one. We expose our students to sound, to different accents, different ways to pronounce things. So we try to be inclusive in finding the diversity within the same language, within the writing literature, or also just the spoken. So I think that's important. As a teacher, if you want to speak with a Puerto Rican accent or with a Salvadoran accent, it does not affect anything as far as that. Like she said, it's all about just speaking and making sure that we connect with that.
So I thought I halfway understood, and they've corrected me that I was wrong. But the most important things to learn, the most important language that you're going to learn when learning a language other than English is something that's actually relevant to you. I mentioned that I could tell you all about Charlemagne, and that's cool and all, but if you try to take a 9th grader or even a freshman in college and tell them, like, hey, we're going to learn how to talk about French history, they don't care. I mean, some days I barely care about that. They care about saying things that are important to them. So my favorite or my least favorite, or I am like this, there is, there are. And present tense. I know that in theory we're supposed to love grammar, and we do, but 95% of communication takes place in the present tense. And so if you spend all of your time studying all the more complicated grammar, you're neglecting the fact that we spend most of our time in present tense. And so common usage language is the best. For years and years, when we learned reflexives, and I'm sure you remember this, we learned to talk about washing ourselves. We learned to talk about brushing our teeth. I don't know how interesting that is or necessary it is to communicate to other people. Do you need to specify that you brush your teeth? I think it's more interesting if you specify that you don't brush your teeth. But so when we're learning languages, we should be spending our time on things that are actually going to give us some mileage, things that we're going to talk about a lot. So we learn to talk about the things that directly around us first, our family, our friends, our habits. And then as we're getting better and better with that, we learn to describe these things in more nuance. And then finally, the abstract. If you start with the abstract, you're not going to want to learn.
What she said first about not brushing your teeth is good advice. Second, I thought try to throw in as much pop culture, so music, what's current news, things like that, which is most relevant. Like she said, there are certain things that I can get really excited about, but they don't care. So what's going on, what's currently going on, if there's a group on tour or a new movie coming out or something that's being discussed, I try to throw that in there, make it as relevant as possible. There are some things that need to be learned, of course, but just make it a balance and make them engaged. I mean, they're the customer. They're what we're here for.
Exactly, and that's some of the courses that we offer in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures. We're really talking about these global challenges directly, things that are going on right now in politics, things with climate change and sustainability, unequal distribution of wealth, things that are really relevant, for us personally, but also as a global community. So I think we're almost out of time. In 1 month's time, so on March 4th, we're going to meet here again at the same time, same place, March 4th, and we'll hear from a career advisor. So some of you might have been sitting here thinking, yeah, okay, being a teacher, that's interesting, but it's not for me. If that's you, come back on March 4th. We're going to be hearing from a career advisor who does this work professionally, helping people to tell their story and to build their career based on narratives. So that'll be exciting. But right now, please join me in thanking Mr. Palafox, Mrs. VanDon, and Mr. Hogan. Thank you again, and have a good evening. Drive safe.